This is Berenice Jackson interviewing Hazel Roberts of Buffalo, Oklahoma, December the 11th, 1984. Okay, Hazel, tell me where you were born.
I was born in Kapron, Oklahoma, 1907. My father ran the dray there at that time, and about 3 years later he moved out on the farm, and we did farming from then on, and then later, he got hard up and he went to, sold out on the farm and moved to Heartner and started running the blacksmith shop. And us kids would go out in the country and gather cow chips to help Mother have a fire. She told us to pick up all the flat ones and put them in one sack because that way she knew how many to use to bake the bread with so the bread wouldn't get too brown. So that's where we got by until I was about 5 years old, and the folks moved back out on the farm, and a man told my dad, he said, I'll help you get started on the farm, and I want you to get out there and get those kids to work. And so we made a big garden and got started from there.
Mm-hmm. Did you help pick up cow chips?
Yes, Mom. And I had 9 brothers, and I was the third one in the family, and my brothers would always make me pull a little wagon. They'd fill it full of the flat ones and then put a sack full on top, and they carried the sack back on their back to the house. And this ranch was just north of Heartner, which meant it's about a half a mile from the edge of the pasture to carry the cow chips in. But as time went along, we had to go farther out into the pasture to find them to get enough to bring home. And we did that for one whole summer, gathering cow chips.
For your winter fuel?
Yes.
What kind of stove did your mother have to cook on?
She had a big old range stove. I don't remember Home Comfort, I think it was.
Oh, those were good stoves.
And she'd bake bread, and it had a reservoir on it, and she'd heat the water in the reservoir for the evening baths, and she started in giving the littlest one the bath, and on up to about 3 would take a bath, and then she'd empty the water, and then 3 more would take a bath.
And you say you lived in Heartner?
Yes, we lived in Heartner when Papa ran the blacksmith shop there, and then we moved out on the farm, and I started school at Rose Hill School out on the farm in the country.
Still in Kansas?
Yes. No, we were in Oklahoma when we went to Rose Hill Schoolhouse. We moved out on the farm just across the line, about 3 miles across the Kansas and Oklahoma line. And then my daddy kind of got ahead from there, and he finally bought a farm, and we moved over on this home place, and we had 4 brothers and my sister and I, and we lived in a 4-room house. My sister and I had 1 bedroom, and Mother and Father had 1, and had 2 beds in the other room, and the boys slept in it. And
you said you moved over on the home place. Now, where is that located?
Well, it's about 4 miles from the Kansas line, 4 miles south of Heartner, Kansas. And I own that land over there now that they...
I think it's down this way. And what was your main chores when you were a child growing up, helping your folks?
Washing the dirty diapers out of the pail. That was what my main thing was.
And what kind of soap did you have to use?
Well, we didn't, just rinse them out is what I did. Rinse them out of there and dry, hang them up on the line out on the back porch, and then the next day Mother would put them in the washing machine and wash them out and hang them on the line. But that was my first chore, and then carry in the kindling as I grew up, carry the kindling in and peel the potatoes for supper. And then when I got to be about 10 years old, I had to go help milk cows. We milked around 25 head of cows. And so I had to go help the boys milk cows, and we separated the milk. We hauled it to the house in little cream cans and in a little wagon, and then separated it, and then we fed a bunch of calves on the bucket calves, we'd call them, and the younger ones would get a little bit of the whole milk in there, and the older ones just got the skim milk because they were big enough to eat grain. And
now, did you have to break the calves to drink out of these buckets?
Yes, Mom. You'd stick your finger down in the milk, and they'd suck on your finger, and then they'd get to sucking this milk, and after 4 or 5 feedings, well, then they would suck the milk without your finger, but you had to use your finger to start with, to teach them to train them to suck the milk out of the bucket. And then seemed like Mother had a baby about every 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
As long as I was growing up, well, a new one came to the house.
Yes.
And when my youngest baby brother was born, well, I told Mother, I said, I don't want no more baby brothers. If you can't have me a baby sister, we'll just give it away when it's born. So when it was born, it was a boy, and I wouldn't go look at it for a couple of days, and Mother shamed me, and I said, well, I guess it's all right if it is a little boy, but I want a little baby sister so bad, because my neighbors across the road had a little baby sister out on the farm, and I wanted a little baby sister too, like all other little girls. And we had to walk about 2.5 miles to school all the time, and in the fall of the year, we'd always have to walk, and then when it got cold weather, well, my daddy had an old black horse that he'd hook up to the buggy, and his kids could ride to school. One morning, the boys had greased the buggy on Saturday, and we got in the buggy to go to school, and the front wheel came off in the buggy, and the hubs of the buggy hit the horse on the heel and scared him, and he started running. He ran about 2.5 miles with us in the buggy. My two brothers jumped out and was going to get the horse by the bits, of course, and the horse, when they jumped out, the horse was done gone. And my sister and I rode the buggy on in. He ran into a neighbor's house and just ran up in front of the house and stopped. And this woman, and we were both screaming at the top of our voice, and she ran out and grabbed us out of the buggy, and the old horse just stood there. And her husband come and got the horse and tied him up to the hitching post, and then they called my folks, and they come down and picked the boys up on the way and come on down and got the horse. None of us were hurt, thank goodness. But
well, what did they do?
Didn't get the nut tight, and the wheel turning, it came off. See, and and then the hub had hit this horse's heels and scared him, and he just started running with us. My sister and I, my oldest brother, was sitting in the seat. My other brother was standing up behind this little buggy. Papa took the top off because he said, I don't want you to get drugged to death if that horse that ever turned the buggy over said he'd drag you to death with the top on. So Ralph told her, he said, jump out and get him by the bits. He thought he could stop him if he got in front of him. Well, when he jumped out, the horse had done gone, you know.
Sure.
Running,
he couldn't catch up.
No, but they didn't realize that. They were too small to realize it.
Well, that was quite an exciting experience.
Yes, it certainly was.
Can you remember your grandparents?
Yeah, Grandma Rhodes especially. Now, Grandpa Rhodes, I didn't remember him too well.
Now, Grandma Rhodes, that's your mother's?
My father's mother.
Oh.
My mother's parents were dead when they died when my mother was 8 years old.
I see.
And she lived with her oldest sister. And she raised her, and then till she was married, she stayed with her oldest sister. And they lived at Almistice, Kansas when she died, when her parents died, and her oldest sister lived down by Alva, Oklahoma, so she came down and stayed with her and went to school down there.
But your mother's name, what was it?
Matilda Mance.
Matilda, and her maiden name was?
Mance, M-A-N-T-Z.
I've seen that name somewhere just recently. Mance.
There's quite a few of the Mances live around over by Alva now.
And what was your father's name?
Garney.
How do you spell that?
G-A-R-N-I-E.
G-A-R-N-I-E.
Rhodes.
R-H-O-D-E-S?
Right.
Okay. And your father, where did his parents come from?
Well, they came from Iowa moved around Alva, and they lived there. And Garney was born there by Alva, just about almost 17 miles northwest of Alva.
And then your mother living there too.
Yes, that's where they met.
And when were they married? Do you remember?
No, I really don't. Let's see. I don't remember the year at all.
And how many brothers and sisters did you have?
I have 9 brothers and 1 sister.
And sisters is 1. There were 11 in your family.
Yes. It was a big family. I think back and wonder how my dad made a living for all of us. I could only make a living for my one.
You weren't all there at the same time.
Well, just about. There were two of them that were married, and they were still, a big bunch of them at home. And my daddy died when he was 55 years old, and they were 6 of the kids still at home then.
Oh.
And Mother, she just thought she could never make it, but she got along just real well.
Mm-hmm.
She sold 1/4 of land that Papa didn't have paid for at that time, and made a little money on it, and so they just got along real well.
Good.
Considering everything.
Did she get work of some kind?
No, they just milked cows and fed
Mm-hmm.
calves and raised chickens and had a big garden, and they had
Yeah.
quite a few fruit trees on the place,
Mm-hmm.
and so they just made their living that way.
Well, that's great. Okay, now then, we got up to where? You were married.
Yes, I married Warren Hendricks at first, when we were both in college at Alva.
Mm-hmm. Hendricks. H-E-N?
D-R-I-C-K-S. And he was down from Cedardale.
First husband.
Yes.
Did you have any children?
No, we didn't have. We both taught school.
Well,
And then we were both in college, and we both taught school. And I had told him that I was going to not teach school in the spring, that I was going to quit teaching, and I was going to have a baby. I was going to be at least 3 months along when school was out.
mm-hmm.
Well, he got killed in August the 28th on his birthday in this explosion that they had out east of town here. Phillips Pipeline had a big explosion out there.
Yes. Tell me about that.
Well, I had fixed his supper, and I just started out the front door with his supper to take it down to him. And just as I got on the step, well, this thing just went shoo, just like a big blast of fire or something. And so I got in the car, and I drove up to the booster station, which was just a half a mile south of me, and they wouldn't let me go any farther than from there till later in the evening. And then I found out that my husband was right in the main part of the fire. He and Donald King were side by side, one on one side of the pit and one on the other with their team, and they never got any farther. When it exploded, it just killed them right there.
And their horses, too?
Yes, their horses, too. There were 23 head of horses was burned up. A lot of the men had, 8 men died from that explosion, and a lot of the horses ran back into the fire when it went off. See, it excited them, and they ran back into the fire. And the pasture came clear up to the house, just across the road from where I lived, and our team ran back up that way, just right in the corner, and the harness was on fire. And I stopped and ran out there, but they turned and ran back, and of course they burned, and they set the pastures on the fire with their harness and things dropping off, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And it was about 11 o'clock that night, and this happened at 7 in the evening before the fire went down enough that they could get in and get the bodies out that was burnt. Several of my neighbors were in there. Mr. Osborne was there, and he didn't get burnt, only just 2 places on his back, but he breathed the flames, running out of the fire.
Mm-hmm.
And it was about the most tragic thing I ever saw.
What caused that explosion?
A man was up on the hill. He was going to weld some pipe together to put back in the line, and there wasn't any wind at all, just a little bit of air, and he lit this blowtorch, and it set the grass on fire and just went right down over the hill to this gasoline, and when it hit that, it exploded just in a big blaze right in the air.
Mm-hmm.
The blaze was seen for miles away.
I remember hearing about that explosion.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember anybody else that lost their lives in that explosion?
Yes, George Osborne and Allen Hill Township, Clyde Store, and there's one boy, Cummins boy from Kansas, and I don't remember what part of Kansas he lived in, but he lived up in Kansas someplace. But he was at Laverne at that time working for somebody, and came over and went out there to work. And then 2 of the lunchroom boys were burnt real bad, but they lived. They didn't die.
Mm-hmm.
And
I remember what a tragedy that was. Just
it certainly was.
Mm-hmm.
But I went ahead and taught school that winter.
Were you teaching in Buffalo?
No, we were teaching in a rural school, out in the rural schools.
Oh.
I taught the rural school all grades, from the beginners up to the 8th.
Mm-hmm.
Cooked lunch for them during the Depression time. You know, they had the commodities, and they'd get commodities, and I bought a great big old super-made aluminum kettle to sit on top of the heating stove.
Mm-hmm.
And I would eat with the children. I'd buy tomatoes and take to put in the soup, and onions and things that we didn't get from the government, and to make the soup fit to eat for the children. And I'd cook a big old kettle of soup, and then once or twice a week we'd have a big kettle of beans, and then we'd have potato soup, and I cooked their dinner, and they all brought a big bowl from home, and then after dinner, I finally, at first I washed the dishes. Finally I decided it was time for the children to. So I assigned them 2 at a time to wash dishes.
Yes.
So
they weren't happy about that.
No, they weren't very happy about it because they had to wash dishes before they could go out and play. But they finally got pretty used to it. And they said, hurry up and get done so we can go play. Hurry up and get done. They wanted to get their dish, see.
Yeah.
So it would take a long time to eat.
Now, you would fix that of a morning and let it simmer slowly.
All morning while I was having school.
Oh, you're making me hungry. Yeah, I bet that was good.
It was good, and the children enjoyed it a lot, and it gave them a good hot meal. And a lot of them at that time were pretty hard up and didn't have much at home to eat, too, because that was back in the Dust Bowl days in '33, and I'll tell you, the dust would be so bad some days you couldn't see the children from the back end of the schoolroom to the blackboard. It would be that bad in the schoolhouse. You'd have to walk up towards the blackboard to see what children was at the blackboard or writing their lesson or working arithmetic or spelling or something on the blackboard. It was so bad. The dust was so bad. And the thistles piled up in the draws on the road that you was almost afraid to go through with your car because you was afraid the car would catch a fire from the thistles. See, they'd hang onto the car and hang onto the muffler. And you'd gun it and go through there real fast, and then you'd get up on top of the hill and stop and look, see if you was dragging any.
Yes.
I drove 13 miles to school and taught school, and my husband taught in the district where we lived. And after about 12 years, I said, well, now then, I've drove long enough. You're going to drive this year, and I'm going to teach here at home. And he said, well, these people probably won't hire you. And I said, well, we'll find out. I'm going down to apply for your school. So I did, and they hired me. And then he went to teach at Berenice, where I was going to teach, and so that way I wouldn't have to drive, and he would. Bad weather was hard to drive.
How long was it you taught now?
9 years.
9 years. Well,
Harper County.
Describe what a one-room school would be like in a day's time. How would you arrange the classes and so on?
Well,
how many pupils in all grades?
First thing in the morning, we would have our open ceremony. Maybe we'd just salute the flag and sing God Bless America. Maybe we'd just have some of them would have a prayer. We always had prayer in school, which they don't want them to have today, but we did then. There wasn't any controversy about it.
And did you read from the Bible?
Yes, we did. And I'd have the older students to do that.
How long would that last?
Oh, about 10 minutes. We took about 10 minutes at the beginning of school for our morning devotion. And then of course, our lessons was all signed the day before, and I'd take the beginners up to the blackboard or up to the recitation. They had a recitation bench, and you know what that is.
Yes, I know, but tell us, because others may not.
It's just a long bench that we had built in the schoolhouse. And one year I had 6 beginners, and I'd have them to come up there, and then I would, we had flashcards, and I used flashcards for them to try to teach them the words of the letters. And
did you teach phonics?
Yes.
Yes.
And then I would take about 5 minutes of that time and send them to the blackboard, and I would tell them what letter to write. And the day before, each day I would say, tomorrow we're going to learn to spell kind, K-I-N-D. Okay, the next morning they were to be able to write that word in order to learn their ABCs. And I would tell them, whoever learns to say their ABCs first will get a big red pencil. Well, each day or two somebody come up with their ABCs. They could say, well, finally they all got them, but they all got a big red pencil, but then the first one got the first one in.
Yes.
And then I took about 5 to 10 minutes on each recitation when I'd start in down with the lower grades and just and have them to come to the recitation bench unless we had a specific class that it was all writing or something in the upper grades. Why they came to the recitation bench and read, or in their reading they read out loud. Each one would have so many paragraphs or a certain page to read. And arithmetic, well, we usually worked that on the blackboard every day. I'd send the class to the blackboard, and I'd give them a problem to work, and they would work it, and that way I could tell whether they'd worked it at home and worked it for themselves, or whether Mom had worked it at home and brought it to school. It's happened a lot of times.
You know, a teacher can read those things. They just can, you get to knowing your pupil, and you know.
That's
you
right.
And you can tell what a home life of a child is like, too, can't you?
Yes, you can.
See, I taught school.
Well, that's good.
Well, now that...
And at recess, and then while we played black man or baseball. If we played baseball, well, the little ones all got to bat first. They weren't on the team, but then we'd choose the bigger ones and choose up sides, and I had as many as 25. Finally, the last 2 years I taught. One year I had 5, and the next year I had 13. But we didn't have such a good time playing ball then. But before that, we had a big balls team every year, and the better ones would play ball. And we
baseball?
Yes. And on Friday afternoons after Christmas, we'd have ciphering matches and spelling matches with other rural schools over the country, and we'd go there, and they'd come to our school, and we'd usually try to get somebody that wasn't in the district to come and be the judge for the cipher match so that they could tell who won first on the blackboard.
Yes. Well, a ciphering match. The kids today don't know what a ciphering match is. Can you explain it?
Well, they usually there's send one person to the board, and and then she chooses someone, or their teacher sends someone from the other side up to the board to cipher with this person, and that's just working the arithmetic problem. And she'd say, I want an addition problem, or if I want subtraction, or if I want multiplication, or I'd like to have a written problem. Why, then you hunted that problem up, a problem like that up, and gave it to them, and then you'd say, turn around, and when you said turn around, they started working the problem. If it was the addition problem, well, it was already facing the board, and as soon as they got it down, they could start adding it up. I had one pupil one year that added the tens, and her mother had taught her to do that when she was little. Well, the time she'd get her problem down on the blackboard, and the other child that happened to be a little bit slow, she'd have the first 2 columns already added up. The tens, she knew how many she had, and she was real good. And one year I matched a cipher match with another school, and I had children that was very poor in math. They just seemed like I had about 5 from one family, and they were real poor, but they could write Roman numerals. They learned how to write Roman numerals. So I matched this other school with anything in the book. So we had 3 women from Buffalo to come out to be the judges, and I sent this girl up in the 6th grade, and the other girl was at the board. She went up. She said she won Roman numerals. Well, she beat her. Next time, this other girl took something else, and she beat my student. And then my student took Roman numerals, and she beat her. And she ciphered down the rest of the school on the other side with Roman numerals. And the teacher was real unhappy at me because she said that wasn't arithmetic. And I said, I matched this match. Anything in the book, I knew that I couldn't beat you in numbers, but I knew I could beat you in Roman numerals, so that's the reason I matched you. Anything in the arithmetic.
Well, that was really cute.
This one of these boys, John Weeder out here, he was one of my students, and he was real good in Roman numerals. He's an awful poor student, but he has done awfully well in farming. He farms about 1,000 acres of wheat now and has a lot of big machinery. He has 2 boys and 2 girls of his own, and he has done awfully well. He was real ambitious, but they were just slow to learn. But he has learned by doing a lot more than he'd ever learned in books, and he's a real big farmer now.
I had a student that was a poor student that when he did learn something, he never forgot it.
Yes. There's children like that, and there's others that just can't learn it all.
And he could remember it, while others would learn it quickly and then forget it.
Next day. Come test time, they didn't know anything, did they?
Well, what other kind of games would you play at school?
Well, usually black band or baseball. There was no place to play hide and seek or anything like that. Then when it snowed, we'd play snowman and catch the bear and stuff like that in the snow, to make big rings and play, and children had a lot of fun.
What years was this that you taught there? You taught 9 years there. What years? From what year to what year?
Well, I taught from 1933 till 1940. 42 was the last year I taught.
How did the Depression affect you and your family?
Pretty bad. You taught school for $50 a month. I did the first 2 years when I came to Harper County. Then the next year I got $65. In the joining school, they thought I was a pretty good teacher, I guess. So they came over and hired me and gave me a $10 raise or $15, and I thought that was wonderful. My husband had his degree, and he was getting $85 a month, and it was real hard. In the summertime, we would raise turkeys, about 500 head of turkeys, and sell them in the fall of the year after school started to help make money enough to keep things going. We finally got enough money ahead to pay $800 for 160 acres of land. And so we bought our first quarter of land with the turkey money. And when we bought it, well, we had about $500 that we owed on the land and the house. And so I told him, I said, well, I'll pay the house off. And we bought a house and moved it in there. And I said, I'll pay the house off with my warrant this winter, and you can pay the land off. So we did, and so then we had this quarter of land with a 4-room house on it. And we gutted up, we'd bought an old barn from a neighbor down south of Selma and had it moved up there. And so we had a pretty good-sized barn, and we put our turkeys in there and built roosts in there for them to roost on and keep the cows from eating them at night.
Well, sounds like you did real well.
We did real well. We just, but a lot of people had an awful hard time. And if we hadn't raised turkeys in the summertime, we could have never stayed in Harper County. First year I taught school out here, it was so dusty and so bad, and I drove that 13 miles to school, and I told the school board, I said, well, I'll tell you one thing. If God will forgive me for coming to Harper County, I'm going back over to Alva, and I'm never going to come back in this county. But by the time school was out in the spring, I was so in love with the children. They asked me if I wanted to stay another year, and I said, oh, sure. So I've been here ever since. I've been here 3 years now.
Well, you know, it was quite an experience to teach school in those days.
Yes, it was.
The children they respected the school teacher.
They sure did, and they didn't sass you back or nothing, and you went into the schoolroom and you said, everybody get quiet and get your books out, and they did. They done just exactly what you told them to do. And
and they learned.
They did. They really learned. I think they learned more then than they do now, accordingly, you know, per year. And I don't know how in the world us old school teachers ever got all the classes in. Now they have 33 students in one grade, and they just can't get all their classes in. I just don't know why they don't, but they...
Now, when I went to school, we had physiology and geography every other day. One day we'd have physiology, next day geography.
Well, I had home ec and agriculture every other day. That was the 2 classes that
you alternated. Well, you had to get all the subjects in.
And on Friday afternoon, we would, right after dinner, we'd have penmanship. The whole school would have penmanship. Everybody got out their penmanship book and their pen, and the smaller ones their pencils, and we just had penmanship once a week. Other than I would criticize their work, what they'd send in, hand in to me. I'd say, now this isn't made right, and you better learn to make this better. And I had one little boy that always made N instead of M. He'd never put 3 N up and down on it. And I said to him, do you know the difference between N and M? He said, well, sure, you spell M with mama. You spell N with A-N-D.
That was cute.
So I said, well, let's learn how to write it then like that. And he said, I forget. And every day he'd tell me he forgot. If I'd say something to him about his N's and N's, he'd say, I forget.
Now, did you have your ciphering matches at school? Would you train your children?
Yes, on Friday afternoons after the last recess. We'd have a ciphering match or a spelling match. One year I had a little girl in the 4th grade, and she wasn't too good of a student, but she helped her mother a lot at home. And the word chocolate came up. About 4 or 5 7th and 8th graders went down on the word. She was down on the end of the line, and I gave her the word chocolate, and she just spelled it right out. This kid said, how'd she know how to spell chocolate? And I said, well, she cooks at home for her mother, and she knows how to spell chocolate. And I said, tell the children how you learned how to spell chocolate. She said, I always learn how to spell it when Mama's making chocolate cake because it's always on the wrapper. So I thought that was kind of cute.
Yes, it was.
learn how to
Okay.
keep things from children.
You lost your husband, which was a very tragedy thing in your life.
42, that's right.
42. What did you do after that?
I taught school that winter, and then the next spring, well, we had cattle and we had some land, and I thought, well, I believe I'll just not teach next winter, and I'll take care of these cows and farm the land. So I go over to Alva and I buy me a little John Deere tractor and a combine and a disc, and come out home and a plow, and I come out home and I start doing the farming.
Mm-hmm.
So I farmed for 2 years like that by myself, and then I thought, well, that's for the birds.
Yeah.
I'd scoop wheat, and I rented 320 acres from the neighbor lady there, from Alva, Mrs. Hoke. She had a land right there by me, and I rented hers and farmed it with that little tractor and scooped the wheat on the pickups and hauled it to Selman.
Now that'd be year what, 40,
44.
45, somewhere along there.
Yes, uh-huh.
What did you get for wheat at that time? Do you remember what?
No, I relatively truthfully, I don't remember, but I know it wasn't too much.
Uh-huh.
Well, I keep the grainer full, so I'd have some for seed in the fall.
Mm-hmm.
And then I decided I'd sell the farm, and, well, in fact, I had gotten $9,000 from Phillips for the death of my husband.
Uh-huh.
So I decided I'd buy 3/4 of land right west of Buffalo, which didn't near pay for it, but it helped a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So I decided to sell one of these quarters of land out there, the home place where I lived, and take that money and put it with this $9,000 I'd got and buy these 3/4 west of town, and I did. So when I did that, then I moved to town and rented a house and lived in it, and that broke my heart to have to pay rent. I paid rent for 3 years, and then I built me a house, and I went in debt to build my house. And that fall, well, I got me a bunch of calves and put on the wheat pasture out west of town, and they made real good. So I paid my house off and paid off my cattle and finished paying. I owed $10,000 on my farm. I paid it off, and Mr. Fossey run a meat market here, and he told me, he said, "Hazel, I think it's terrible for that man to sell you that farm for that high price." He said, "You'll never get it paid for." And I said, "Oh, yes, I will, Mr. Fossey." He said, "Well, whenever you get it paid for, I'm going to give you the best steak I've got in the house." So the day I got the mortgage, I came back to Buffalo with it, and I went in and I said, "Mr. Fossey, here it is." He said, "Well, just a minute, I'll get the best steak I've got in the house." And he cut me a great big old sirloin steak because I paid off that land. He didn't think I could do it, and I didn't think I could either.
And then what did you do with your land after you got it all paid for? And
Well,
you still own it?
Yes, I still own it.
You rent it out, do you?
No, I hire a man to farm it for me.
Oh.
And I adopted a boy in '52, and I had, in the meantime, after I'd bought this land out here, for getting ahead of my story there, in '54, I married R.I. Roberts, and he drank a lot, and then we just...
What was his name?
R.I. Roberts, Robert R.A. Roberts.
R.I.
Everybody calls him R.I. Roberts. I don't believe my thing's
It isn't. You need to turn it. And mine's just about out, so let's turn them. What do you say?
Well, mine, there must be something wrong with that.
I'm continuing on side 2 with Mrs. Hazel Roberts. All right, what year did you marry R.I. Roberts?
'48.
48.
We lived together about 4 years, and then he just kept drinking. So we adopted this little boy in '52, and he wouldn't quit drinking, and I told him, I said, I'm not going to raise this baby up with someone drinking, and if you want to have a home, you straighten up. If you don't want to have, you just keep on going like you are. So he just kept on going like he was, so I sued him for divorce. This little boy was 6 months old, and I raised him by myself. He lives down there by me now, and he helps me farm, and he's got a wife and 2 children of his own. He's got a little boy and a little girl. And so this little gentleman is, this Roberts, he's in the nursing home, and I look after him all the time. I said, no other dumb woman in Harper County did but me, but he doesn't have anybody to look after him, and so I...
You mean this husband, that you still look after him?
Yes, I still look after him, and I'm considered of his estate, so I take care of his business and look after him in the nursing home. And my son uses a grass pasture and farms the land. His land, he had 1,200 acres of land, and so he looks after his land. And
well, he appreciated you. He had faith in you and your integrity, even though he couldn't stop drinking.
That's right, I think so
He
too.
respected you.
I think that's right.
And then after you divorced Mr. Roberts, what did you do? Just
I continued on with I gave him, he had land and I had land when we were married, so when we got our divorce, he took his land and I took mine. And I hired John Weeder, this boy I was telling you about a while ago, farmed someone's land, to come out and farm my ground, and I just paid him so much an acre for farming it, which started out $1.25 an acre, now it's $4 something an acre. But anyway, he farmed my land, and I run cattle on it in the wintertime, and I'd wrap this baby up and put him in the pickup and take him to the farm and kick the calves in the wintertime when it stormed or anything, and then otherwise I'd run them on the wheat pasture in the wintertime. But and I just kept them out west of town. This land joins Buffalo on the west side, and we just had cattle out there in the wintertime, and then in the summertime I'd scatter them out on the grass that we had around over the country.
Yes. And you fed the cattle all winter long?
Yes. When there was a storm, well, I'd have to go feed them. And
what would you feed them?
Cake. We put cake in the trough and haul out baled hay for them, little small bales of hay, alfalfa hay and prairie hay, put in the tanks. And
did you ever get stuck in a snowdrift out there?
Well, no, because I always went down and had the chains put on before I left town, because I knew I couldn't walk back down and carry this baby in the cold, so I always was prepared to, One day I was honking at the calves to come in, and a man heard me honking out there. He come driving in real fast, and he said, I could just see you turned over out here in the snowdrift with that baby. And I said, well, no, we were just calling the calves in. They got out, and somebody went out and left the gate open, went through there hunting, I think, and left the gate open, and the cattle had got out and went out onto the wheat field. There wasn't anything for them to eat. It's covered with snow, but anyway, they was out there hunting. And while I was raising this boy, I was 8th District President of the American Legion Auxiliary, and took him with me most of the time. I'd take him to the motels and take some other little boy with me and leave them in the hotel. Usually the hotel's where I stayed, where they was having the meeting, I'd leave them in the room, and they'd come down where we was at and sit down in the back and listen. And right now I'm president of the District Garden Club, president of the Singletons Club in town, and president of the museum in town. We went out to another lady and I went all over Harper County selling life memorial and life membership to get money to buy this building to put the museum in, and we made her. So we've got a museum. We're awful hard up right now. Our roof leaked, and we had to spend the last $1,000 we had to get our roof fixed, so we owe $700 on our museum, but we hope to get it paid for someday, somehow.
Well, I hear it's a nice museum. I've never seen it.
We'd be glad to show it to you. Would anytime.
Where is it located?
It's right down on Main Street, just right there on the same street where the bank is.
I've seen that ad on the window. Yes, I know where it's at.
We've got a lot of stuff in there, I'll tell you that. It's nothing fancy, but what we've got is antique.
It's really
Yes,
antique.
it's really antique. There's nothing very fancy in
There's a
it.
story behind everything you've got.
That's right.
During the Second World War, did you have any relatives?
Yes, I had 5 brothers in the service.
Oh, you did.
One of them was in that Belgian Bows, and the rest of them were all...
Is he still living?
No, he died of cancer of the rectum.
Well, and what was some of the others, and where did
they were in the air? 2 brothers. I had 2 brothers in the Air Corps, and one of them had foot trouble, and they took him. He was just, he said he was a lieutenant's slave. He polished their shoes and cleaned their deck and cleaned their rooms, and that's what he did because he couldn't walk very good, but they took him anyway, and then that's all he did while he was in the service. But and one of them was in the infantry. This one that was in the Belgian Bows, and one of them was in the Air Corps, a pilot, and the other 2 was mechanics in the Air Corps.
Well, where did they serve?
Well, one of them, this pilot, he flew a lot out of England. They sent him to England, and he flew a lot from there. And then this one brother never did that was work for the lieutenants. He never got out of the States. He just worked for the boys here. And then 2 of them were over in Germany in that Belgian Bows. One of them was in the Bows, and the other one was behind the lines back farther. He wasn't. He was younger than the other one, and he hadn't had his training as much, so he wasn't up in front.
I see.
So they were there.
The one that flew the plane out of England, is he still living?
No. He got an accident. How do you say it? Smothered to death with a gas stove in his room.
Oh.
So he's not. I've got 3 brothers living yet.
Are they here?
One in Denver and 2 of them in Alva.
Well.
My sister passed away last year.
Well. There's not too many of the family left.
No, there's not. I'm the 3rd one in the family, but 2 older than me are gone, and then the 3 or 4 younger than me are gone.
Do you remember the end of the war? Was there a big celebration?
Oh yes, there was. There was a big celebration in Alva. My father and the 2 little boys at home went down to Alva, and Mother she wouldn't go. She said, "It won't be over till my boys come home." So she wouldn't go to Alva for the big hooboob they was having. And
what did they do? What kind of
firecrackers are going off and yelling and hollering and bands are playing, and I didn't go either. Of course, Mother wouldn't let me go with Dad, but then that's what the kids said when they come home. They had a lot of fireworks and a lot of bands were playing, and people giving speeches up on high platforms and everything. And the mailman came by, and I run down, see him coming with his car. It was kind of unusual in our neighborhood at that time. See him coming, he had a new car, and so I ran down to get the mail, and he said, "Oh, Hazel, the boys will be home one of these days now. The war's over."
And that's the first you knew about it?
Yes.
Well,
I was so thrilled.
Oh, yes. Well, I suppose they had a big dance that night, too.
I don't remember about that, whether they did or not, but I suppose they I know Papa came home early because we had a lot of cows to milk in, and the boys came back. It was home.
And
we had just gone over home that day to visit the folks because my mother was so depressed, and Warren and I went over there to visit with them, and then Warren was killed about the time the war was really in full force with this explosion, and it was a pretty lonely old time.
Yes, I can imagine. Were you old enough to remember the Black Sunday?
Yes, sure was.
Where were you?
I was at Central Union Schoolyard having a baseball game with the neighbors.
Oh.
The neighbors had a baseball game there, and we decided that one of the neighbor ladies and I, we decided we'd come to Buffalo and get some ice, and we'd make ice cream that evening. We got in the car and started, and we just got about 2 miles from where the baseball game was, and I said, "Oh, look at that terrible cloud coming up there. Let's go back home." I said, "That looks like a tornado to me." Well, we rushed back to the schoolhouse, and about that time the dirt hit, and it was so black. And we took the children that was there, we took them down in the basement of the schoolhouse, and their parents wasn't there, and kept them there. And the Moore's children, they thought they ought to go home because they had a lot of cows to milk, and Daddy'd be mad. But while it was so dark, you couldn't even see to find the fence rows. Finally, about 9 o'clock, with the two oldest boys and my husband, they went out across the road and got a hold of the fence line and went east. They lived east about 2 miles, and they followed the fence line down east. And but they couldn't tell where the road was at to turn off. The Morses lived about a quarter of a mile north, so they finally came back because they couldn't find the way down to the house. So they walked back that fence road and come back to the schoolhouse.
Oh, what time did it hit?
It was about 4 o'clock in the evening.
Oh,
But it was just as black as night.
Mm-hmm.
And the fire was flying, windmills were turning, and the fire was flying from the windmills. The sparks, there's so much electricity in the air, and you see sparks flying from the windmills. And you didn't dare go shut them off.
No.
The wind was blowing so hard, and that dust was terribly thick.
I don't see how they followed the fence. They'd have to hold on.
They did. They held on to the fence, and it went right straight east, see, to Morris's house. But then when they went east of this, then they lived off here about a quarter of a mile. Well, when they got down there, Warren said he just knew they was probably done gone past the road because they couldn't ever see where the road was to go down to the house. And the three girls stayed there with me in the basement, but they came back because they never did get down to the house. The next morning, then Warren put them in the car and took them home.
Did you spend the night there?
Yes, we all spent the night at the schoolhouse, the basement.
Well, what time then was it over with?
Well, it was still real dusty the next morning, but it was daylight enough that you could see to get around in it. You don't see down the road probably 1/8 of a mile.
Oh.
And when the sun began coming up, well, you could see the next morning.
Yes.
But it was a terrible, terrible time. Terrible dark.
Where we lived, the rabbits and the thistles was rolling ahead of that storm. And the birds, were they up there?
Yes. Hollering. The birds were just peeping their heads off. And the chickens all went to roost.
Well, that was a terrible time.
Yes, it was, and that was a terrible time in the 33, and that's when I said that if I get out of here, I'll never come back. Because I didn't think the dirt blew over to Alva like that, and of course it hadn't, because that was the worst time it was.
Yes.
So the storm was in 33.
Well, would it blow one day from one direction and then come back the next day?
Right, and the thistles would roll one way and then back the next.
And the fences were full of thistles.
Oh, it was so full, you couldn't do it hardly. The cattle, that's about all the cattle had to eat was those dry thistles. I don't know how they ate them, but they did. They would eat them and drink water. My land, the livestock drank so much water. If you didn't have wind one day, they were out of water because there just wasn't anything left for them.
Well, I think it was a dry atmosphere, don't you think?
Yes, I think so too. And they're eating those old dry thistles, you know, they just couldn't get enough moisture in their system.
Okay, and then your son went to school here, I suppose, in Buffalo.
Yes, he graduated from high school here. And he married a girl from Visay, Pauletta Steinmetz, and they have 2 adopted children, a little boy and a little girl. The little boy's 2.5 years old, a little past 2.5, and the little girl is just 3 months old.
Did he get to go on to college?
I took him to Okmulgee to go to school over there, and got him a room and everything the year that they got married. I wouldn't have let him get married if I hadn't thought he was going to go to school, but they both told me they'd go to school at Okmulgee. He wanted to study to be an electrician, see. And so I took him over there, and they got him a room and everything. They were supposed to be married the 6th of August and go to school the 21st. Well, they went back over there, and he went to school first day, and he come back home, and he called me and says, "Mom, come and get us. We're not going to school over here." He said, "There's too many hippies over here and wild guys." And he says, "They drink and crowd around." And he said, "They make so much noise at night in this rooming house, we can't sleep." And he said, "We're not going to stay over here and go to school." He said, "Just come and get me and I'll go to work for Paul." And so I said, "Well, okay, I'll come tomorrow. I'll come over there and see what it's all about." And I went and talked to one of the teachers, and he said, well, for a boy that had been out in the rural area and hadn't never lived any town life, that it was a pretty rough place to go to school. And I think they were just more homesick than anything else because they'd just been over there 3 days. And So I brought him back home, and he went to work for his father-in-law and worked 2 years
Mm-hmm.
helping him in refrigeration.
Mm-hmm.
And then I told him, I said, they wasn't making enough money to make a living for both of them. I bought him a trailer house and put him down there at Visai, and I told him, I said, now, Don, I'll tell you one thing. Your mother's getting too old to make a living for you guys, and you sat down here at Visai and tried to help Paul make a living. And I said, it cost me $200 or $300 a month plus what you make down here. I said, if you want to live off on the farm, you're just going to have to move to Buffalo and help me make a living.
Mm-hmm.
Looked at him and he said, well, I hate to move back to Buffalo. And I said, well, just up to you. I'm just not going to give you any more money and live down here. If you want money from me, you're just going to have to come and help me because I'm getting too old to make all the money.
Mm-hmm.
So he said, well, all right, sell the trailer house. And I said, okay. So I advertised the trailer house, and they moved back to Buffalo, and I gave them a house there right next to me in town, and we built onto it, and they've been living there ever since.
Mm-hmm.
So we've done real well. We bought about 400 acres of land last year. We have some wells on some of the land, and they were paying pretty good, but now they're not doing anything.
Mm-hmm.
But that helped buy the new land. So I bought the land and put it in his name. So he's got 400 acres of land paid for. And
sounds like he's a lucky boy.
I
have a mother like you.
Thank you.
Well, what church do you belong to?
Christian church. First
Mm-hmm.
Christian. His wife and him go to Baptist.
Oh, that's where you divided, wasn't it?
She was a Baptist when he married her, and so she first told him that she would go to whatever church he belonged to when they moved to Buffalo. They went to Baptist church and down there. But she started going to the Baptist church, so I said, well, it make me any difference where I go.
Mm-hmm.
I said, well, we used to belong to the Baptist church here, but when he got to be about 9 or 10 years old, the boys that he run with went to the Christian church.
Mm-hmm.
So he went up there all the time, so I moved my membership and his up there.
Mm-hmm.
And then now that he's married, he's back in the Baptist church. So I told him I wasn't going to move back here with him. I was going to stay where I was at. I was satisfied I was going to stay there.
Well, you never did teach anymore then?
No, I substituted teaching in town when I first moved to town, but for the teachers here in the grade school, I substituted quite a bit, but I never got another school to teach. Little schools began to kind of dwindle away, and that was it.
And you didn't want to teach in town?
Well, not very bad. After I had accumulated this land out here and all, I felt like I needed to be out there and see about my cattle and stuff to make a living. I felt like I could make more money on that than I could teaching school. So,
well, sounds like you've had an interesting life in spite of a lot of heartache.
that's right, I have had it. And I've done real well for myself, not bragging on myself, but I've done real well. I've had a lot of good luck as well as a lot of bad luck. And I said that Harper County had been good to me. They didn't really owe me anything because I came out here barehanded and started teaching school, and I've accomplished quite a little bit. And when my daddy died, mother was farming some land over there that was rented, and this woman was going to sell it because she didn't think anybody could farm as good as my father. So mother called me and she said, Hazel, could you help me buy this land over here? And I said, what's the woman want for it? And she wants $4,000. And I said, well, you call her back up and tell her that I'll put $2,000 escrow in the bank in Alva tomorrow, and for her to send me the deed, and when I get the deed and abstract approved, I said, then I'll give her the rest of it. And she said she would, so she called me back pretty soon and said, Mrs. Graham said that'd be just fine. And mother was so thrilled because I was buying that land for them to farm, so I still own it.
Well,
I had this money from the $9,000 I got out of the Phillips when my husband was killed. See, I'd saved $5,000. I said I was never going to spend it, but I finally did put it in land.
well,
And it's paid off.
yes.
This land over there, Woods County, has a well on. It's done real well for me, and it's paid back all I paid for the land plus.
Well, that's great. The land over around Alva, isn't it more productive than around Buffalo?
Well, some of it is. The rain's been pretty bad over around Alva the last 2 or 3 years, but as a rule, it's better, they get more rain over there. But, well, this last year, the wheat was real good over there. Of course, it was here, too, last year. My wheat out here west of town on summer followed the ground, and it made 57 bushel last year.
Well, that's
So that's
good.
on summer followed ground. See, that's about So you divide that in half, and I said, well, it was cheaper to summer fall than it was to, if you knew you was going to get moisture every year, you'd pay the summer fall.
Yes, that's right.
But you don't always know that.
In your museum, do you have anything in the line of history of Harper County?
Yes, we have all of the old Harper County newspapers from way back from the beginning when it was Harper County Democrat.
Mm-hmm.
And we have.
What year would that be?
You asked me something I don't know. 1907. We had the paper from back in 1907 when Buffalo became, when it was Brule. Buffalo was Brule at one. That was the first name of this town, was Brule.
Well, there was a newspaper office in Brule, was there not?
Yes, we have those.
And you have those?
We have those.
Oh, wonderful.
And Charleston out here east of Buffalo had a newspaper out there, the little was a store and a church and schoolhouse, and we have their papers. And Slap out down in the southwest part of the county, it had a newspaper. We have those. And I talked to this lady at the Historical Society in Oklahoma City, and she said that there were a few of the Harper County journals that they did not have.
Mm-hmm.
And she would like to get with me someday and find out the ones that they didn't have and see if we have them up here. And I'm sure we do have.
Mm-hmm.
But they're getting, pretty fragile.
Yes.
And we don't let anybody and everybody go in there and look through them.
Sure.
But we'd like to get them bound, but we just don't have the money to do it, that's all.
Well now, do you have copies that you can send down to the state from Brule, those early copies?
Yes, I think they have them down there, don't
they have them.
I talked to her, and she said that she thought they had them all on tape.
I see.
Now, our school just recently bought those tapes, and we haven't had a chance to see them yet, but our school bought all of those microwave tapes, films, and we plan on sometime this winter getting them and just take time and go through them and mark the weeks that they don't have.
Mm-hmm.
She said if we do that, and then they would make us a film to go along with that paper.
Oh, well, that's great.
So we plan on doing that sometime this winter.
Mm-hmm. I heard something about that was happening at your school last year. You had something special.
We got a $10,000 grant, history grant, and that's what they used to buy these microwave films with this newspaper on. They used some of the money for that, and they bought a machine also to run them on.
It's great. I heard something about that, but I didn't know just what it was.
We've got a $10,000 grant for that, for historical purposes.
I saw your superintendent's picture in the paper the other day. Something about the Buffalo School, but I didn't get a chance to read it. Do you remember seeing it?
Well, we've got a piece in there every week, but I don't remember particularly seeing it.
Well, this is in the Woodward paper.
Oh, well, I take the Woodward paper, but I didn't even notice it in there.
Well, I believe it was in this new
this little newspaper, yes.
Woodward News.
Yes. I don't get that very often because I don't go uptown every morning, and they're all gone. Now, yesterday they went around over town and threw one out at everybody's house.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the first one I really had of that.
Well, can you think of anything else?
I made me a note or two here before I came up here.
Is your mother still living?
No, my mother's been dead about 7 years.
Well, this Warren Hendricks, did he have any relatives around here?
He had a sister that went to school at Alva. They were raised down by Cedardale. He only had one sister living. He had 3 brothers dead, but one sister living only. And she left here and went out to Phoenix, Arizona. And then she went on a trip to Alaska with a bunch of people from Phoenix, and she got killed in a car wreck up there 3 years ago.
How sad.
So the whole family's gone.
Well, have you found something
No, I
else
didn't
to
see
tell
it in
me?
your... I had no... guess I hadn't told you.
Well, I'm real happy that you came in for me to interview you. You have really made this early day school in such a plain way of looking at it that I think I'm just real proud of it.
Thank you.
Because so many of them won't go in detail like you did. And
I really enjoy teaching in school. I just, I like the children and
yes,
really enjoyed it.
yes. I
I
can
was so
tell.
old I'd like to teach now. I'm too old to teach.
You're not too old to teach. Did you go ahead and get your master's?
No, I didn't. I just got my degree out of Alva.
Uh-huh.
And then I never, like I say, started farming and messing around with cattle, and
Yes.
and I love those cattle. I can just go out there and sit there and watch them eat all day. My son would go out to feed them in the morning, and I'll be sitting there looking at him and say, "Well, Mom, let's go." "Well, what's your hurry? I like to watch these cattle eat." "Well, you can come back." He's always want to get back and do something else.
Uh-huh.
But me, I could sit out there and watch them eat all day. Yesterday afternoon, I got real depressed at home. He'd gone to Oklahoma City to the doctor. He'd been having some trouble with his stomach, and so they were gone, and I just got so depressed, so I just went out and got in the pickup and went to the farm, drove around the farm,
Mm-hmm.
looked at the wheat, went down through the pasture, and come back out and come home, and I was all right.
Mm-hmm. Let's go back to your childhood days. Did your folks butcher their own meat?
Yes, they did. Papa would butcher 6 or 7 hogs every year, and usually 2 beeves in the wintertime, and Mom would make sacks out of big sacks out of flour sacks and put over the quarter of beef, and Papa would take the wire stretchers and pull them up to the top of the windmill and let them hang at the top of the windmill so they'd stay good and cold. And then of evenings he'd go out and slice off steaks and roast and things for to cook the next day, because they'd be thawed just a little bit by evening, and if they didn't, he'd take the saw and saw them off if Mother wanted some to cook. And they'd cure the hams out. We always ate all of, I told Mother we used to eat the side meat all up and then save the hams for the men in harvest time, which we did, because, they didn't have no way of didn't have no refrigeration.
No.
And we'd save the hams and the best part of the shoulders to feed the men when they was working in the field in harvest time. My dad run a thresh machine, and I'd go with Papa when they started threshing bundles, and from one neighbor to the next, and help the woman cook for the men, because there was usually 32 to 35 men to cook for, and I'd go help the woman cook for the meals, and had 2 brothers that would drive the header barges and load up bundles and haul them in to the thresh machine. And
did he butcher these hogs all at one time?
usually, about 6 of them. Usually first thing in the fall, about 6 of them, and then in the spring, about 6 more.
Oh.
And we cure them out and clean the intestines and stuff the sausage. I just thought the other night about how terrible. Now you can buy the casings already stuff the sausage in, but my land we had to clean them. And I thought of that the other night, and I was laying in bed, because how nasty a job that was.
Explain how you did that. Didn't you take the outer layer of the intestines?
You did, but what you had to do was, the first thing you had to do was to cut you off a big hunk of it and start it in and turn it wrong side out.
That's what I thought.
And then take your hand with a plastic glove or rubber glove, if you could afford one, and clean this bowel off from that, and then we'd put them in salt water and wash them, and then we'd take them out and put them on a board and take a dull knife, casing knife, and scrape them and scrape all that fat off from the outside of them. And then we'd have to turn them back over on the other side and scrape the other side in case there was any fat in. And then Mother'd soak it in salt water overnight before we'd ever stuff it in sausage. She'd wash them a time or two and then soak them in salt water. And then we had a sausage stuffer, and we'd stuff them.
My mother refused to do that. She'd make her sausage out in patties and fry it. And
Mother fried this stuffed sausage, and sometimes Papa would smoke it, but usually she'd fry it and put it down in a 6-gallon, 10-gallon jars and pour lard over top of it to keep it.
That's why my mother did it.
That she fried just in patties, we eat it up first.
Yes.
Save the others for company.
And
we make a big garden and take it. We had a big 50-gallon barrel in the basement, and we put it up with pickles, salt brine pickles in the basement, and then get them out in the wintertime, a dishpan full, and soak the salt out of them, and Mother'd make pickles out of them to use during the winter. Didn't have jars enough to can them all up at one time, so. And one Thanksgiving, Mother sent me down about 3 or 4 days before Thanksgiving to get up a dish pan full of pickles, and I ate 3 or 4 of them salted yellow pickles, and I didn't want any Thanksgiving dinner because they made me sick.
But they did taste good.
They did. They really did. I just really enjoyed it. And of course, I was always kind of a saltaholic anyway.
And your father, how long did he go with the thrashing machine?
Well, every summer for about 5 or 6 years, he had the thrashing machine.
Well, he made money on that, didn't he?
Yes. One year we had the wheat froze down in the spring, and we had the most beautiful field you ever saw, and it just kind of turned yellow, but there wasn't a bit of wheat in the straw at all. So Papa took the header and cut it and stacked it so the cattle could eat it that winter. And all the rest of the neighbors around did the same thing. There weren't any wheat in the straw. Froze out.
As a late freeze, wasn't
Yes,
it? Yes, that would do that. And what kind of machine did he have? Do you remember?
Had a big old case thrash machine, and then I don't remember what the name of the tractor was. He had, it was a big old luggy thing. I know it had big lugs on it. And
Steam engine?
Yes,
Yes. Well, can you think of anything more now? We're just about out of tape. You said
the neighbors all came in to help butcher. I know that. When Papa's butcher, well, there'd be 5 or 6 of the neighbors come in and help butcher the hogs, and then we'd go to their house and butcher. One time my dad said I couldn't go to school. I had to stay home and cook dinner for all the men. My mother was kind of ill, and I was crying because I had to stay home from school. About that time when Mr. Burns came and his wife, and she said, "Now, Granny, you just let her go to school." Said, "I'm going to get dinner today. I came over here to get dinner. You just let Hazel go to school." Well, I was working so hard to not to be tardy nor absent.
Yes.
So I ran all the way to school, 1.5 miles. Well, I was just all in when I got there, but I got there we had 10 minutes after 9. And we wasn't counted absent until 10 minutes after 9.
Yes.
So I got there in time to not be counted absent.
Your butchering, that was more or less a neighborhood get-together.
Yes, it was.
And then the liver was, everybody had some fresh meat to take home with them.
Everybody had fresh liver to take home with them every time. And if when we butchered beef, some of the neighbors would take a hind quarter, some would take a front quarter, and then when they butchered, we'd get one back.
Yes.
I don't know whether they weighed it out or whether they just gave it to one another, just as was. But anyway, I know a lot of times that they would take a quarter of beef home with them, and Papa would hang up 3 quarters, and they do 1 or 2, maybe 2 of the neighbors would take one, but usually just one of them was well enough that he could afford to butcher beef, and the others weren't. But
this is Berenice Jackson interviewing Hazel Roberts of Buffalo, Oklahoma, December the 11th, 1984. Okay, Hazel, tell me where you were born. And
I was born